We're rolling. Oh, great.
Millie, say your full name for me.
Millie Shapiro. No middle name. Never had one.
How about maiden name?
Maiden name was Millie Goldberg.
And tell me the name of your parents.
My father was Joseph. My mother was Bessie.
And when were, where and when were they born?
Well, hard to say. I would think my father was born 1890. My mother had to be born about, let's see, she was almost 90 when she passed them. Also, 1890, 80, 89, something like that, I would think.
And where were they born?
They were both born in Russia, the Ukraine area. My father in Berdichev and my mother in Praskurov, which is the Ukraine area near, I think, the main city, Kiev. And,
Did they talk about what life was like?
very rarely, very rarely. I don't know why. They never really spoke. We would read about pogroms or something. They said they had plenty of those. But they never really went in deep like you see in the movies or read about it. Never spoke about it. And I got the feeling that maybe they never went through it personally, that they were spared because of where they were living. I don't know, really.
So they didn't. Did they
You know,
talk
like
about?
you see Fiddler on the Roof now, Anna Tefka, the way, they rummaged and ravaged the little town. I never heard that from my parents. Yeah, strange.
So that was your father's parents.
My father's,
Your that was
my parents,
your
I'm
parents were
talking
both
about, both born in Russia.
okay.
There. Towards the
Um,
latter part of 1890, 91, 90, something like that.
and tell me about when were you born?
I was born in 1915, January 21st, 1915.
Tell me what life was like growing up. Uh, where were you born?
In New York City, like 104th Street, must have been off Fifth Avenue. That's what, I don't have the exact address. I somehow never memorized it. It's on my birth certificate, but that's what I remember. I don't know why I never took much interest in it. I know I was born in New York City in that area.
What was your first recollection?
Frankly, I do not have any recollection per se, except for a brass rail that was outside the building with a few steps leading up to the into the house. It had to be where several families lived. I know we didn't have it to ourselves, but I don't recall anything about the apartment at all.
So at the time you were born, who was living in your
Just
apartment?
my mother and father that I know of.
Um,
I'm the oldest of five, so I was born, of course, the first.
Tell me about your sisters.
My sister Rose, who's 22 months younger than myself, and then my other sister, Sylvia, whose nickname is Bibby, and she followed 6.5 years after I was born. Rose was born in New York City, and Bibby was born in Williamsburg.
And how about
And then came my brother Oscar, God rest his soul, who was born a year after Bibby. And then my brother Harold, who followed in, uh, about 4 years after. And that was it, the five children.
you mentioned something about speaking only Yiddish.
Yeah,
What was that?
Evidently, I don't know what I remember. Not I remember, but I was told that when I started school, and in those years, you know, you could go to school somehow at a whim, whatever. I was maybe a little past 5 years and a few months to just enroll in school. Your parents took you in and dumped you, I guess. I don't know how to. Because I took my sister one day to school, and she was like 5 years and 3 or 4 months when she started 1A. We didn't have such a thing as kindergarten. So I was told when I got into school, I barely knew any English because we come from a background in the house. Whoever was there, mother and father, or visitors, family that came, that's all I knew was Yiddish. So
Did people speak English outside the house in your neighborhood?
that I can't, that's the trouble. I don't remember any of that. That's something. I don't know whether, I don't think I suffered any traumas that I would block it out. I just don't remember. Nothing, I guess, was that significant to cause me to remember anything of that nature, except for the brass rail that was on that stoop, as we called it, flight of concrete steps going up. I don't know the apartment, what it was like, or anything like that.
Is the brass rail the first thing?
A brass, well, evidently it was a common thing for those type of houses. I can't say.
Is that the first thing you remembering? At all?
That's all I'm remembering from when I was born till I don't know what age. I can't say it was the house I was born in. Could have been the house where my sister Rose was born.
You mentioned something about bathing in a double wash tub.
Yeah, that was already Rose had been born, and she had to be close to 2 years of age. So that made me about 5, with 22 months difference. That was on the east side, and that was in my mother's mother and father's apartment. When they came to America, brought over by their children, they got them that apartment on the east side. And in those years, there could be one toilet on the floor for maybe 4 or 5 families. And no baths, just toilets. No showers, no tubs, nothing like that. All the bathing was done in public baths. Or you bathed in these next to the sink, or by the sink was one big container, then another one next to it. And that, so I don't remember, but it wasn't tin, it had to be heavier. But, you know, it looked like a tin thing. Double wash tub, we used to call it. So all the washing was done in that. To get hot water, it was not a running hot water. I think they had to put coins in something to heat up the water that they were using to make it hot.
Right.
It was a different type of lifestyle. But whether our house, our apartment, where we lived at the time, was the same way, that I don't remember, because it had to be a novelty. Otherwise, I wouldn't have remembered going to the grandma's house and bathing in the wash tub. You know what I mean?
Talk about when your grandparents came to America. When did they come to
Well,
America?
which ones are you?
Well, who came first?
The first was my mother's parents. They came first.
And what are their names?
That was Abraham and Sylvia. They came first. I know, because it was in their apartment that I remember that wash tub on the east side. Where, I don't know on the east side, but I know it was there. It could be from hearsay, but the experience of bathing there, that I remember. You know? They came first, so they had to come in 1920, or maybe even a year before, you know, right after the First World War, I would think, because I'm sure quite a number, I think, came Jewish from Europe. A lot of Jewish people came in around at that time. So my husband came in then, too. And a lot of them were held back because of the war. So, you know, you didn't.
And your other
The
grandparents,
other grandparents,
their names?
I had Isaac and Esther. That was my father's father and mother. They're the ones from Kiev. Now, strange, they were educated because both of them read Hebrew. They wrote Hebrew and Jewish, and they read and wrote. You know, that meant that they had to have an education, having gone to the school, whatever they called it then. And all of their children were educated. They had 4 sons and 1 daughter. And they evidently had to be people of fairly good means to get an education in Europe. So they came in, I would think, see, 15, I would think the middle 20s. They were brought over also by an uncle, one of their sons, who was doing rather well in the United States, and he got them over. You know, when you got people over in those years, you had to guarantee that they wouldn't be a burden on the country, that they could either work and make a living for themselves, or they would be well taken care of by whomever was bringing them over. And so they were in a little bit much more comfortable circumstances than my mother's parents that were brought over. I knew the difference.
How well do you remember each of your grandparents?
Well, my mother's mother, I have very little recollection of her. I only see her in bed, and I know she was ailing. That had to be prior to the time she passed away. I know she'd had an operation, and she did not linger long after that. My mother's father, I don't know his exact age, but I understand he was past 90 when he died. And him I saw quite frequently, because he lived with each of his daughters from time to time. Each one took turns. He never actually lived with my family, you know, because we have a large family and never had that much room, but we visited frequently. So he passed during World War II. Don't have a recollection of going to the funeral, and chances were that they didn't, you know, take all the kids. We were quite a crowd, the whole family, so it was a little difficult because who had cars in those years? And getting to the cemetery was so far, it just wasn't done then. That was my mother's father. My father's father passed away suddenly, comparatively young man, his early 60s, I think, from a massive heart attack. It had to be in 33, 32, 33. I remember coming back from where we lived. We moved back to Brooklyn because his wife, my grandmother, would be alone because they had their own apartment. And so we moved back so that she'd have where to be. My mother accepted her to come into the house, you know, with the 5 children and everything. I guess the others weren't too happy about it. I don't know. I never listened to what was going on in the family. And she lived, when she passed away, I had already been married 2 years, I believe. So I got married in 37, so I had to be about 39 when she passed away.
Did they talk to you about living in Russia and what life was like there?
No. Never did, and I don't know why. If they did, then I don't recall. Never had stories like that. No.
Millie, I just have to ask you to
What?
not play with your necklace? Because the microphone's so near it, so it picks up.
I shouldn't play with it. I'm not touching. I have
The
my
microphone is right here, so it hears when you move around.
when I'm
you touch-
moving.
when
I
you
haven't.
No, when you touch.
Have I? I thought my arms were here.
Yeah,
I
just
was not
a little
aware.
bit.
Just when you're going like
Oh,
this.
I see.
Well, let me ask you this.
What?
Well, what do you know of your grandparents, what they were doing before they came to the United States?
All I know from my mother's father, he made a lot of children. He was like a tutor to young boys, preparing them for their bar mitzvah. That's all he did. He knew the Torah, and he knew what to tell them and how to do it. That was it. The women, as far as I know, his wife, which I say she didn't last too long, and I don't remember her really, but none of the girls were educated. So that was it. Any education they had, when they got to America, they went to school or what, and that was it. That was my mother's father. There's, if you remember when you come to the house, I have a picture of him with a good deal of the family around him. I remember him in a bathrobe with his beard, and it was always geshuckled. That was his favorite. It was always leaning over some sort of a sitter, always reading the Hebrew and praying. Praying. Spent his days and nights praying. Never saw him in anything but a bathrobe and bedroom slippers. And he was a comparatively healthy man, you know, that I know of. That was his life. He seemed to be happy with it. Now, on the other hand, my father's father, like I told you, was educated and all. He was a shochet. You know what a shochet is? Is the man who kills in the Jewish manner, the kosher way, chickens, cows, and stuff like that. Now, whether he actually did the killing or he was what you call the watcher, the mashgiach, to see that it was done correctly, he had steady employment. And I know my grandmother, his wife, read Hebrew because I have her Torah, little Torah at home that she had, and she read from it. So she understood, and she could read and write Jewish and maybe Hebrew. Could be because all of the children read and wrote and composed poetry and stuff like that. That was on my father's side, educated, see, which was quite a novelty for Jews in those years. So they had to be people of means, and they had their own apartment, so he made a living. But he died suddenly from a heart attack. Oh, so that was that. His age, I really don't know. But I know it was in 33, and I heard he was like in his early 60s that he passed away.
Because your grandparents were religious, were Orthodox
Yeah.
Jews?
Well, I don't know how Orthodox they were, but they adhered to the Jewish religion. And coming from the areas that people came from, the Jewish people from the other side, from Europe, from the small towns, they kept the tradition more so. They're more secular than from the big cities where, you know, they didn't keep the Sabbath so holy, let's say, and not go to temple every day and stuff like that. But these grandparents, the men anyway, did.
How about your parents? Did they keep...
My mother kept kosher. My father, should rest in peace, I don't know what you call these type of people, agnostics. He read very well. He could get up at the podium and read from the Torah like a rabbi, understood what it was all about, but thought nothing of not keeping the holidays. He didn't put too much emphasis on the holidays. You know, he could play cards Friday night. It wouldn't bother him one bit, you know. Go out Saturday, spend money, wouldn't matter, you see. Could not explain him. but he was well educated. My mother, on the other hand, didn't know anything different. But it was very interesting. My mother was one of 7 girls and one brother. Everyone looked up to my father. He was the only one in the whole group that was educated. That meant, in those years, it meant a hell of a lot. See? You could have money, and all. Didn't mean as much as having education. That was the stress of the people, all that lived on the east side and everything. It was very important. So they all looked up to him because of his education. So that was it. I mean, this was the thing I remember from early on.
How about, you said your mom kept some of the traditions.
My mother did, the candle lighting every Friday, baking the holly and keeping a kosher home and doing the special things for the holidays, the special delicacies that you make and stuff like that. She always did that.
Paint me a picture of what family life was like during the holidays. Let's say Rosh Hashanah or the high holidays.
Well, when I was younger, I know my mother, of course, never went to temple since she couldn't read, so there was no point in her going. So she was home. My father, if the only time he would go to temple on the holy days, if there was a good, well-known chazan, a cantor, partaking of the holiday near us, then he would go. If it was just the round-the-corner temple or what, because we never belonged to any of them, it wasn't of any great interest to him to go. Therefore, I had very little of that, except the couple of years that I went to Hebrew school, and I picked up the language easily. So somehow when you're in school and the teacher was important and they had an apt pupil, so I attended the services, Saturdays and the high holy days. It was like I was an outstanding person. Well, but that's it. Not that my father came. I went, And actually, until I got married, had the children, even before the high holidays, I started go. Because my husband, God rest his soul, he was what you call he had that background for the holidays. So he also liked cantors. Well, but was not intense, really wasn't.
Describe like the dinner table when you were growing up. What was what was the dynamics? Paint me a picture of what the dinner table was like.
Well, I'm trying to remember which one I should. Before I was married, growing up.
Yes.
Well, all I know is the holly I see on the table with the candles lit. We always had a nice white tablecloth, white napkins, and the wine, that. And whatever holiday, Friday night we always had that chicken and soup. I couldn't have anything but chicken and soup and a little piece of meat. And that's about it. I can tell you the truth, nothing particularly stands out to that degree that I could say one year was better than the other as I was growing up. We had such a mixture of times. We had lush years where I got a piano. They bought a piano for me. I took piano lessons. I had dancing lessons. And then I started Hebrew. And I was doing so well in school. And then the balloon burst. And we had nothing. And I don't know, just learn to sway with the punches. It was just one of those things. And I say, so much of my childhood It's out. Out. I cannot pinpoint. Could, tell you about my piano lessons. I know I had a recital. Dancing was a recital. Things were good. And then nothing. Somehow think I had 2 lives.
What kind of dancing did you do?
Free form. It was ballet and like free form. We were leaping from one end of the room to the other in sheer costumes. I don't know, it was about 10, 11 years old,
Can you describe the costumes?
It's like the Greeks wore, the toga type tied at the belt. That was it. And, colors. I don't remember what my color was, but that's what it was. So that when you leaped, the thing flew out. It reminds me of Auntie Mame. When she sent Patrick to dancing school, they were dancing nude or whatever. They wore costumes that revealed everything. So
who was Auntie Mame?
Auntie Mame was the show. That's it. You didn't see Auntie Mame? You didn't? How about you?
I've seen Auntie Mame.
You know what I'm referring to? Okay. It was part of the theater.
What was school? What do you remember from school?
I remember my, I don't know if it was my first day or second day, but I remember it was PS 16 in Williamsburg. It was a very, very old school. What separated classrooms was something like this. That's what it looked like, but across the wall.
Describe that. People can't see.
It's lattice type of a very large lattice type of work. That's like a lattice, I think. What would you call this? This that I'm looking at.
Checkered?
Checkered. It was not a full wall like you go from room to room now. It was wood up to about here, and the top of it was panes of glass, perhaps, squares. That was it. There was a doorway there. So everything was very thin between the classrooms. That was my first school.
What was your favorite class? What did you excel in school?
I was good in math. Math was very good. I didn't care for history at all. Pain in the neck. Languages were very good for me. I picked those up quickly. Economics was good. English, not too bad. Compositions, that sort of thing was difficult for me. I'm not what you call a writer. I have ideas, but I can't put them down on paper. Some people write very well. I could not. But math was good. Languages were very good. If you get 100 on the Regents, I guess you can't go any further than that. But it was pulled out. Biology was the worst. Couldn't stand biology at all. And almost flunked that out. That was my lowest mark ever in all my grades. The next school...
what was the first school you went to?
PS 16 in Williamsburg. The next school that I went to had to be, I don't remember the number of the next one or the rapid place. I went to 3, 4 different schools.
Why did you move?
We moved.
So when did you move to Williamsburg?
Williamsburg I moved to when I was about 5. Because Bibby was born in Williamsburg, and we're 6.5 years apart. And Oscar was born in Williamsburg.
How about East New York and Vermont
Harold
Street?
was born there in Vermont Street. And then from Vermont, after a couple of years, we moved to Bradford Street. And then that's when the bubble burst. We moved back to Vermont, But when I was in Vermont, in Bradford in Vermont again, I attended the same school because it was the same area, just blocks apart, you know.
What did your father do? You said he worked in a chocolate factory.
He originally, the prime years, he had together with his brother, they manufactured chocolate. Did you remember I Love Lucy, one of the scenes? Did you ever watch her where they show her when it comes down this runner into the cold area and they're supposed to be packing and they couldn't work it fast and they're stuffing it into their mouth? Well, I remember that part of the factory. I remember the whole factory, but that really set me off because we did have what they call a refrigerator room, an attic room, where the finished pieces of chocolate that had been dipped, pieces of pineapple or dates or nuts or raisins, dipped in hot chocolate, and put on this thing, and it went down 2 flights to the refrigerator room where it was picked off the runners and put into boxes so that it was sold to whoever ordered boxes of chocolate.
What did your friends think of you having a father who worked in a chocolate factory?
Oh, listen, they're very jealous because I personally, for years, couldn't look at chocolate because there were afterwards, when things were so bad, we might have had chocolate in the house because he became a chocolate salesman. We may not have had bread, but we had chocolate. That sort of thing. He was a good father. He really was. Never really made a good living. But because he was so educated and know-how, and he was very good to the family and the children and everything, he should have made much more of himself than he did. But anyway, that was it. So that chocolate factory stands out in my mind, and I must have been about 9 or 10 years of age that, that I remember it.
When you're moving from Williamsburg to Vermont Street...
Yes, to Bradford Street.
Who are you living with at that time?
The 4 siblings are my mother and father. That was it.
In 1927, when you were 12 years old, you moved in with your aunt.
Yeah, that was the move back to Vermont, but not to the original one, because the bubble burst, like I told you. This aunt of mine also was in very bad circumstances at the time with 3 children. We were 5 children. It was one of my mother's sisters that she was very close to. Whatever the men earned was something we had to live on.
What do you mean the bubble burst?
Well, like I say, I had a piano and I took dancing lessons and I had pretty clothes. All of us did. And suddenly there was just no money. There was no money coming in. The factory went kaput. That was it. Father had to go out and find a job quickly. And the aunt, whose husband was he worked in a factory on men's coats. But in those years, things were seasonal. So what they called a slack season. A slack season can go on for 4 months. No income. The other months that you worked, you made your money. Sometimes you worked overtime and you had extra. Sometimes there wasn't even that much. So then for 4 months, there was no income at all. Oh.
So how did that translate into
Well, that
living?
was the big problem we had, because there was no kind of income, so to speak, coming in, or very little of it. So the 2 sisters banded together to rent this house. The rental was almost non-existent. It was so low. We had really no furniture in that house. I think they must have sold off whatever we owned. I know beds, I remember, and I remember a large table and some chairs and a whole lot of beds and a kitchen table with some chairs there in that apartment. bad.
What were you eating for food?
Oh, you know, if I tell you, if I took along to school banana sandwiches, lima bean sandwiches, whatever, all, if I tell you sardines with 2 cans for 9 cents, you can't visualize anything like that. Or tomato herring, which you can't even find today. Instead of salmon in cans or tuna in cans, we had the cheapest priced sardines and tomato herrings. I know my mother would tell me that she would wait Friday till like an hour before sundown, just before the butchers had to close. Now, you don't have refrigeration, and the Jewish butchers were not open Saturday, you know. So whatever they had left, they had to get rid of. Otherwise, they may as well throw it out. So per se, if chicken at that time was going for 29 cents a pound, she could pick it up for 9 cents a pound. And then a lot of bones that were free, and a lot of the bones with a lot of meat on it, because the butchers didn't have the facilities to cut meat like they have today. So feeding a family of 7, talking not when we with even with my aunt, which we were 11 that time, you had to have a lot of bones. That's why we like bones so much. We grew up on them. Marrow, bones, a lot of rolls, bread. I don't know. I guess it must have helped us. We're pretty healthy people, I think.
Did your people in your neighborhood and friends live in a similar way?
You know, I don't think so. And somehow it didn't seem to faze us. It never presented a problem, like to come running in and say, Ma, so-and-so is having, let's say, salmon. Why don't we ever have salmon? I don't ever remember saying anything like that to my parents. Never. I started work part-time in between school after I was 12 years old to bring some money into the house. My other 2 sisters, same thing.
What job did you have when you were 12 years old?
What job could I have at 12? You think I remember? Had to be in a store doing something. My first job.
Did you feel that your income was important to the family?
Now, this one job, let's see, that I worked at, I worked up in the Bronx. Well, maybe I was 13 because I was entering the high school then when we moved to the Bronx. So I had to be about 13 then because I had 2.5 years of high school up there. There was a floral shop around the corner owned by a Greek man. And even though I was so young, I went in there to see if I could be of some assist, looking for a job, you know, to make a few dollars, you know. And he did give me a part-time job. So I don't know whether I made $5 or $6 for the week. I worked for him for quite a number of months. And never thought to take anything for myself. Always went to my mother. The envelope, whatever money I ever made in an envelope, went directly to my mother. And she doled out whatever I might need through the day. So always brown bagged my lunch, no matter where I was. And I didn't drink coffee or anything like that. So it was maybe just plain water. Oh, nothing.
Did you work, this was while you were like 12 and 13 years old?
13, yeah. And one summer I worked for, I had one of my mother's sisters' husband owned a slip manufacturing company in New York. was no air conditioning, of course, in the summer. Fans with the windows open, forget it. 98 degrees, 96 degrees. The ventilation was the worst. I worked there, I remember, $10 a week. And because they gave it to out of generosity, I'm sure, and helped out, the family, rather than just hand my mother the money. So I worked there. And I remember the slips coming out of the machines where these girls were putting the seams together, the sides and the bottom, and it was one after the other, and they were attached by thread. They didn't cut it off and, start on the next one. And that was my job, to cut the threads between the slips. And working from morning, whenever, 8, 8:30, till 5, 4:30, I don't remember.
How about school?
Well, that was in the summer. When I was in school, no, it was homework time, Firstly, the first year I was up there was like afternoon session, 2 sessions of school. Like I got there at 11 and school was till 4. So there was just time to do homework. Fridays, all the girls, as they grew up, had chores. Either wash the windows or scrub down the kitchen floor, the hallways, or do silver or polish, the furniture. Help mama. Do ironing, stuff like that. Would you think back upon those times? And, I don't blame the people. This is how you were brought up. And pretty near everybody were pretty much in the same circumstances if you lived like in that building. Maybe one family had a little bit more, so they ate a little better. But they didn't live better, you know what I mean? They didn't move out of that circumstance to go to a more expensive neighborhood. Per se, when things were so bad in the 30s, when you had this terrible depression, fruits and vegetables and stuff would come around on a wagon. Man would be yelling, potatoes a penny a pound, apples a penny a pound, Now, we lived on the top floor of a 4-flight walk-up. That was called the 5th floor, naturally. And we had what you call a dumbwaiter. The rich homes have dumbwaiters. You know that? From where the cooks cook and everything. And they pull it up like this with a pulley to the main floor where the other servants take it out and serve it. These dumbwaiters went from the ground floor to the top floor. Oh, so if you're buying heavy groceries and all, it's like 25 pounds of potatoes, kind of hard to lug up 4 full flights, So use the dumbwaiters to get it. Things were so bad, and the dumbwaiter was great, because who lived next door to you, she could open her door, knock on your door, and you had conversation with your neighbor. Because telephones, very few people had. Had one phone in the building on the 3rd floor where you got 2 flights down or 2 flights up. And whoever called, they would holler up the apartment, so-and-so, telephone. So the woman would say, oh, Mrs. Goldberg, they're selling potatoes today, a penny a pound. I'm going down. How many pounds can I buy for you? Oh, my mother says, I don't need potatoes today. I got plenty. Didn't have the penny to buy a pound of potatoes. I mean, we had times like that. So you begin to wonder, like I look now at my children, of course, my grandchildren, they're different type of life. It's hard. I don't even expect you to understand. Why should you? Life is better, and probably your children will have an even better life, I hope, than the ones you have. One thing we were, my mother was really a very clean personally for herself and around the house. That's one thing. We were extremely neat. We didn't have too much room to put things, but everything had a place and had to be there. Everything shone, especially when it came for Friday. Everything was scrubbed down from ceiling to floor. Now, what was I said, 13, a little beyond, going on 4. Sit outside on the ledge and do the windows of the apartment 5 stories up. No harness or anything. I pay a man $5 a window today to clean my windows. I would never think of sitting outside and doing them. It's the same height today where I'm living that it was when I was growing up. Is that something to understand, how things were?
Well, it kind of talks about the values of what people had. What were the 3 important values that your families lived by?
I know they seemed to be interested in education as far as they could go with it, but time stopped them from, going on to college. Yet I had a scholarship to go to Hebrew high school, and I couldn't use it because I had to go to work.
How did that make you feel?
At the time, I don't know, they must have drummed into me, being the oldest, I had a responsibility to the family. That's it. And somehow I lived with it. I didn't resent it in any way. The money I made even when I was working, because I couldn't go to Hebrew High, where would I get the car fare to go down there into New York? The scholarship was for the cost of the, whatever they were giving you, but you had to be able to get there. It was a nickel car fare, so it was 10 cents round trip. Where would I get the dime from? So that's the only, not then, but now upon reflection, or earlier, of course, to say that my father should rest in peace with such a background of education, why he didn't push it further for me. And I got out so young from high school, and I could have gone to teacher's training, which had to cost. So to become a teacher, I'd be a teacher before I was 18 years of age, and to be a teacher then, you were like a millionairess. And he'd make too much of an effort to work harder or do better or, to let me go. And let me go to work at that age to bring in money.
So
it's an amazing thing. So what?
Was work more important than education?
Well, I don't know. The money was.
Do you think if you were a male?
My $10, which paid the grocery bill every week, evidently was more important.
Now, how were your siblings doing in school?
They went, as they got older, they all went to work. Rose was 12 and a half. She worked in a cafeteria. She almost got screwed in a refrigerator by one of the guys that worked there. I mean, chances that they took with children then. That's it.
Sam had a good point. He was talking about the males versus the females.
Well, by the time the males grew up, they didn't have to do that. Well, they got to be of age. By that time, I was like keeping company with my husband. Don't forget there's an 11-year difference between my baby brother and me. He worked for us already. Oscar worked for us. My other brother, was able to, work. They didn't go out to any that I remember.
Did they
They
go
were a
to
little
school?
bit
Did
more.
they go to college?
No. Well, they were not pushed for college either. They got through with high school, and they went right to, I think they went into the Army when, Jerold is 75. When was he born? I'm trying to figure it out. I'm not too good at math these days. 75 years ago was what? 40? No, 30-something? 75, 1925? Huh?
25, yeah.
25, 26. How old then? When they got through, let's say at 20, Jerold was the dumbest. We always called him the dumbest. He was 17 when he graduated high school. Dumbest kid. They all got out. My brother Oscar was out at 16. Evidently, he went to work someplace.
According to today's standard, getting out at 17 is normal.
Yeah.
Of high school.
It is? I thought it was, oh, well, they start earlier maybe, I don't know.
So you mentioned that you got out at age 15.
Yeah.
Was that a normal thing for most kids?
No. It was not. I'll tell you the bad feature of the whole thing was, there were a number of them, was not just me, 15 and a half. My sisters got out also. One was 15 and a half, the other one 16. But when I graduated, they were 18-year-olds. That's what, they started school at 6. Nobody started school before. 6 and 12 years of schooling brings you to 18. And quite a number of girls were engaged. A couple of them were already a little pregnant, though they may have been married earlier, you know, at 17 years of age and finishing their education. So I had no friends at all. How could I fit in with these girls who were gallivanting around with guys?
Did you have any time for recreation?
I tell you who, I played with a lot of boys. Sewers, what they called, Emmys.
What are those?
Marbles, little marbles. Emmys are marbles. You know, they had boxes and squares, and you had to shoot one out of there. Checkers along there. Hopscotch, Johnny on the pony. Handball against the side of the building. And sewers, you know what sewers are? You played in the street with a broomstick handle. The pitcher threw a ball, softball, and you had to hit it. And are you aware there are sewers in the gutters? All right, sewers. So who could hit one sewer, two sewer? And we did a lot of ball catching.
You would play more with boys than you would with girls?
Yeah. Played a lot with boys. Don't ask me why. Boys, I was not a tomboy, but I didn't have any girlfriends.
And you were pretty athletic.
At that time was, you know, whatever. Just to, you know. Don't ask me why I did this, that, or the other thing. I cannot remember such details.
Now, did you ever go into New York City? No. When was the first time you remember going into the city?
Do you know, I don't know how old I was, and I had to be going with someone. I may have gone with my sister Rose. We had to go in, for some reason, I know we had directions to go to Times Square. Being born in New York, mind you, and I'm sure I had to be 16 or more. Yeah, at least 16. Between 15 and 16, and going with her for some reason or another, and standing on 42nd Street and Broadway and asking people where Times Square was. Had no idea of anything outside our streets.
What was your reaction to New York then once you saw Times Square?
Sort of frightening. Kind of frightening. It was not used. Can't say that we got around a lot. My father always had a car that I could remember. So wherever we went, we had a car. That was one of the comps that he got from whatever company he worked for. He always had a car because evidently he must have gone outside of New York to do selling of the particular line that he was handling. You know, it was cigarettes, candy, and tobacco. So that's it. And not only did he take us, he took a lot of my cousins too. We'd pile 9 kids in the car. We'd go gallivanting wherever he would take us.
Where would you go in the car? To the beach? To the
Beach, yeah. Hot nights, we'd go down to the Brooklyn beaches with blankets, spread it out, sleep on it for a number of hours, come back, daylight, you know, because it was so hot in the apartments, no air conditioning, no fans, no nothing.
You would sleep on the beach?
Sleep on the beach, as old as 19 years of age even. I remember doing that.
Were there a lot of other people sleeping on the beach?
Oh, sure.
Really?
If you didn't go to the park for to cool off, you went to the beach.
This was just during the day, right?
Night. Sleep at night, because it was too hot to sleep in the apartments.
Now, did you ever go to the movies? Or,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Who would you usually go with? Friends or
It had to be with cousins. Cousins, and my sister Rose, she and I, we were together a lot. We were on 22 months apart. So wherever I went, she was part of me.
And do you remember anything about the first movie you saw, or
the movies?
Theater experiences?
Huh?
Do you remember any movies that made a big impression on you?
Well, I remember Perils of Pauline, Tom Mix movies. It's what we went to Saturday afternoon when they send you. They had double features, they had serials, they had the news, and the kind that they showed. It was like a 4 or 5 hour thing. It was never ending, the movies, for a nickel that time. And, if your parents wanted to get rid of you, they felt you were pretty safe going to the movies in those years. They knew where you were. And I know we were good kids. We listened. But I can't say any one picture stood out in my mind in any way. I'm very funny. I must have wiped a lot of things out of my mind. Don't ask me why.
Why don't we take a break?
Good idea.
Why don't we pause tape?